Medieval war horses weren't trained to avoid violence. They were trained to become the violence. These animals would bite enemy soldiers' faces off on command. But here's what's disturbing. The first step in their training involves something no modern horse trainer would ever attempt today. When you hear medieval war horse, you probably picture some massive beast the size of a small truck. Yeah, that's wrong. The destrier, Europe's ultimate weapon on 4 legs, stood about 15 to 16 hands tall. That's roughly the size of a modern sport horse. Impressive? Absolutely. Giant movie monster? Not even close. Here's what made them special. These horses weren't bred for height. They were bred for explosive power, short bursts of terrifying speed, the ability to carry 300 pounds of armored knight without complaining. Well, without complaining much. And they were rare. Shockingly rare. Only about 5% of horses in a medieval army were actual destriers. The rest? Cheaper models, coursers, rounceys, the medieval equivalent of driving a Honda to a Ferrari convention. The name itself tells you something. Destrier comes from the Latin word dextrarius, meaning right-hand horse. Squires led these precious animals on their right side. Makes sense, right? You keep your sword arm free and your investment close. Speaking of investment, a single destrier cost roughly 7 to 10 times more than an ordinary riding horse. We're talking modern luxury car money here. Some nobles spent what would be a small house today on one animal. Spanish bloodlines, Italian bloodlines, Flemish stock. Lords traveled hundreds of miles just to find the right breeding stallion. This wasn't horse shopping, this was genetic treasure hunting. But here's the thing, nobody tells you. Buying one of these horses was actually the easy part. Any fool with gold could purchase a destrier. The hard part? What came next? And that started before the horse was even born. Now here's where things get interesting. You couldn't just grab any horse and turn it into a war horse. That's like expecting a golden retriever to become a guard dog overnight. Breeding a proper destrier took 3 generations of careful pairing before anyone considered that bloodline battle ready. Mares were the secret. Nobles evaluated temperament first, size second. A nervous mother produced nervous foals, and no amount of training could fix that. I've seen it myself with regular horses. Some are born jumpy, and they stay jumpy, period. Stallions stayed intact for a reason most people don't expect. Their natural aggression? That wasn't a bug. It was a feature. You wanted that fire on the battlefield. But here's the twist nobody talks about. Monasteries became the unexpected breeding powerhouses of medieval Europe. Monks kept meticulous bloodline records spanning decades. Noble families couldn't match that paperwork if they tried. So the guys who took vows of poverty, they controlled some of the most valuable horses in existence. Within hours of birth, someone inspected a foal's legs. Any crookedness meant immediate removal from the program. Harsh? Absolutely. But a crooked leg meant a dead knight 2 years later. Then there was the Arabian question. Crossbreeding with Arabian bloodlines added incredible endurance. Makes sense, right? Desert horses could run forever, but too much Arab blood created horses too light for armored work. It was like adding too much water to concrete. Looks fine until you actually need it to hold weight. 3 generations, years of careful selection, thousands of hours of record keeping, all before a single training session even began. And that training, it started the moment those foals hit the ground. So you've got your carefully bred foal. Now what? Here's where most people get it wrong. They assume training started when someone climbed on the horse's back. Nope. The real work began within days of birth. Foals destined for war were handled constantly. And I mean constantly. Grooms touched them, led them, stood near them during feeding. The goal? Making humans feel as natural as their own mother. A horse that trusts people from day one is a horse that won't panic when a screaming knight tries to mount it mid-battle. But touch was just the beginning. Young horses ate their meals surrounded by chaos. Servants banged pots together. Blacksmiths clanged metal nearby. Stable boys shouted and stomped. Sounds cruel, right? Actually, it was genius. The horse learned that loud noises meant food was coming. Noise became good news instead of danger. At 18 months, the real education started. Groundwork, they called it. No saddles, no riders, just teaching the colt to move away from pressure, stop instantly on command, and, this one's critical, stand absolutely still. A war horse that fidgets gets its rider killed. Then came sacking out. Trainers draped cloth, leather, and eventually metal pieces over the young horse until it stopped flinching. Some horses took weeks. The good ones? Days. And here's the rule: nobody broke. No rider touched that horse's back until its third birthday. The bones weren't ready. Rush this, and you'd ruin a horse worth more than your house. Any horse still spooking at shadows by age 2? Sold to farmers, no second chances, but surviving the first 3 years was just the entrance exam. The real nightmare training came next. Fire. That's where the real training began. Trainers would light small flames at feeding time, then inch them closer every week. By month 3, a destrier could munch oats while standing 6 feet from an open bonfire. Try getting your dog to sit still near a candle. Good luck. But here's where things got genuinely morbid. Trainers dragged animal carcasses through the training yard, dead pigs mostly. The horses had to learn that stepping over bodies was just Tuesday. No flinching, no hesitation. And those same pigs? They used live ones too. The squealing mimicked wounded soldiers, and their erratic movements trained horses to ignore chaos happening at ground level. Then there's the blood. Butchers would deliver scraps, and grooms rubbed them directly onto feeding buckets. The logic was brutal, but effective. If your horse panics at the smell of death, he'll panic at the worst possible moment. So they made death smell like dinner. The noise training was almost comical. Blacksmiths would hammer metal just feet away from eating horses. Servants banged pots. Grooms shouted random nonsense. One English manor reportedly had servants throw wooden shields down stone stairs during morning feedings. The horses eventually stopped caring. A fully desensitized destrier could stand motionless while absolute mayhem erupted around him. That took roughly 18 months to achieve. And rushing it, disaster. Horses that seemed calm in training sometimes snapped during actual combat. All that careful work undone by one trainer who skipped steps. The medieval trainers had a saying: a half-trained warhorse is worse than no warhorse at all. Now, desensitization made them calm. But calm wasn't enough. These horses needed to become weapons themselves. Now, here's where things get brutal. Everything we've covered so far, that was just making a horse calm. This part is about making it dangerous. The Levad taught horses to rear up on command. Looks dramatic in paintings, right? But the real purpose was tactical. A rider elevated 6 feet in the air could see over infantry heads and spot gaps in enemy formations. Plus, nothing ruins a foot soldier's confidence like 800 pounds of angry horse suddenly towering above him. But the levade was just the appetizer. The capriole was the main course. Picture this. A horse leaps into the air and kicks backward with both hind legs at full force. Anyone standing behind that horse just became a medical emergency. We're talking broken ribs, shattered jaws, fatal chest injuries. Medieval trainers essentially created a rear attack defense system using hooves. Then there's the courbette. The horse hops forward on its hind legs like a boxer bouncing on their toes. Why bother? Because tight formations don't leave room for normal movement. A horse that could shuffle forward while rearing could literally push through packed infantry. And the biting. Yes, they taught horses to bite on command. Trainers used straw dummies and rewarded successful snaps with treats. Eventually, the horse understood. That signal means attack the thing near my face. Trampling practice involved walking horses over grain sacks shaped like bodies. Morbid? Absolutely. Effective? Very. These movements took years to master. A poorly timed capriole could throw the rider straight into enemy swords. The horse wasn't just learning tricks. It was becoming a living weapon that needed careful handling. Speaking of careful, all these fancy moves become much harder when your horse is wearing 70 pounds of steel. Now here's something most people never consider. A warhorse had to learn that the sound of its own equipment wasn't an enemy sneaking up behind it. Horse armor, called barding, weighed between 60 and 70 pounds. You don't just strap that onto an animal and expect cooperation. The process took months, starting with nothing more than a cloth drape across the back. Then came the leather pieces. Then small metal plates. Each addition required days of patient work before moving forward. The chanfron gave trainers the most headaches. That's the faceplate covering the horse's head. Horses depend heavily on peripheral vision to detect threats. Slap metal over their eyes and watch instant panic. Early trainers learned to cut larger eye holes and introduce the chanfron during feeding time only. Positive associations, right? But weight was just half the problem. A fully armored destrier also carried a knight wearing 50-plus pounds of plate armor. Add weapons, saddle, and equipment. We're talking over 300 pounds of moving, clanking burden on a single animal. Smart trainers use sandbags first. They gradually increase saddle weight over weeks, letting muscles and joints adapt naturally. Rush this process and you'd cripple a horse worth more than most houses. Here's what surprised me when I researched this. Horses in full armor only train twice per week maximum. More than that, risk permanent joint damage and what trainers called souring, basically mental burnout where the horse just stops trying. The clanking alone required separate desensitization. Every step created noise. Every movement rattled metal. Still, none of this equipment mattered without one crucial element, the human on top. Here's where training meets reality. A knight didn't just buy a destrier and ride it into battle next week. That's a death wish with hooves. The standard was 2 to 3 years of training together before seeing actual combat. 2 to 3 years with the same horse every single day. Why so long? Because the bond wasn't about affection, it was about survival. A destrier learned to read its specific rider, the exact weight shifts, the particular leg pressure, the unique voice commands. My friend trains horses today, and he says modern riders underestimate how much horses memorize about their person. Medieval trainers understood this completely. And the voice thing? Absolutely critical. During battle, a well-bonded destrier would calm at its rider's familiar commands, even when enemy soldiers screamed from every direction. Your voice cut through the chaos. Their voice didn't. But here's my favorite detail. Knights actually slept near their warhorses the night before major battles. Not for sentimental reasons. The horse needed to smell its rider's anxiety beforehand. Process it. Accept it as normal. Otherwise, that fear smell during combat could trigger panic. Makes sense, right? Now, what happened if a knight fell during battle? A properly bonded destrier was trained to stand over him protectively instead of bolting. That's not instinct. That's hundreds of training hours. The economic angle mattered too. A horse that wouldn't respond to a replacement rider lost most of its value the moment its knight died. All that training, worthless to anyone else. So you've got this incredible partnership, knight and horse, perfectly synchronized. But partnerships need maintenance. And maintaining a destrier? That required an entire army of its own. A destrier wasn't just expensive to buy, it was expensive to keep alive. Every single day, one warhorse ate through 20 pounds of grain and hay. That's 5 times what a regular riding horse needed. Your grocery bill for a destrier could feed a peasant family for a week. And here's the thing nobody mentions. You couldn't just assign one guy to handle this beast. A proper destrier required 2 dedicated grooms working full-time. 2 people whose entire job was keeping one horse happy and healthy. The hooves alone demanded twice daily inspections. Pick them, check them, obsess over them. One tiny stone bruise? Your knight's $100,000 investment just became a very expensive lawn ornament for the next month. But the real killer was colic. Literally. Intestinal problems murdered more warhorses than enemy swords ever did. So after any exercise, grooms walked these horses for 30 minutes minimum. No shortcuts, no excuses. Water quality mattered too. Horses are picky drinkers. They'll refuse stagnant water even when desperately thirsty. And if you force them to drink bad water anyway, fatal intestinal damage. Your warhorse just died because you were lazy about finding a clean stream. Grooms spent hours rubbing horses down with straw bundles. Sounds relaxing, almost like a spa day, but they weren't pampering the horse. They were checking for hidden injuries and improving blood flow. Practical, not sentimental. Here's what surprised me researching this. A lord's stable often employed more workers than his kitchen. Head grooms earned wages on par with skilled craftsmen like blacksmiths or carpenters. All this labor, all this expense, all this obsession with daily care. And we haven't even gotten to what happened when things went wrong in actual battle. Here's the thing about Hollywood cavalry charges. Total nonsense. Movies show knights thundering across battlefields at full gallop for hundreds of yards. Dramatic? Sure. Realistic? About as realistic as a horse doing your taxes. Real medieval cavalry charges rarely exceeded a controlled canter until the final moments. Why? Because horses aren't stupid. A destrier sprinting 400 yards in full armor would arrive exhausted, scattered from its formation, and basically useless. Training specifically prevented this. The real technique was methodical. Knights moved forward in tight formation, conserving energy, keeping their line dressed. Then, in the final 50 yards, they'd accelerate hard. The impact wasn't about sword work, it was about mass. 1,000 pounds of horse hitting you at 25 miles per hour. That's the weapon. But here's something trainers spent months perfecting. Horses naturally avoid collisions. It's survival instinct. So destriers learn to veer slightly at the last second, angling their shoulder into the impact zone rather than taking it straight to the chest. A direct collision could shatter a horse's breastbone. Dead horse, dead knight. And the training didn't stop at impact. A good destrier could reverse direction within its own body length. Critical skill. Failed charges happened constantly, and a horse that couldn't disengage quickly became a dead horse surrounded by angry infantry with polearms. Most warhorses only saw 2 or 3 major battles in their careers. Survival rates were genuinely terrible. A destrier that made it through Crécy? Worth its weight in silver. Experience couldn't be taught. Speaking of teaching, tournaments provided something battlefield training never could. All that training cost money, serious money. So, how did knights afford to keep sharpening their skills and their horses' abilities? Tournaments. These weren't just entertainment, they were the medieval equivalent of prize fighting meets business expense. Win a tournament, walk away with enough cash to fund another year of horse training. Lose badly, and you might be selling that destrier you spent 5 years perfecting. Jousting horses learned something fascinating. They ran along a wooden barrier called a tilt, and they learned to run straight, perfectly straight. Why? Because predictable lines meant fewer accidents. A horse that swerved could impale its rider on an opponent's lance. Nobody wanted that paperwork, but jousting was the civilized part. Melee events were basically organized chaos with blunted weapons. Dozens of knights fighting simultaneously. Horses had to navigate through swinging swords, falling men, and other panicking animals. It was combat training disguised as sport. Here's something clever. Tournament horses wore their owner's colors, and they actually learned to recognize those colors, target the opponents, avoid friendlies, medieval friend or foe identification, running on hay and oats. The physical toll was brutal, though. Tournament horses often developed arthritis by age 12. That's ancient by medieval standards. Their joints simply couldn't handle years of impacts and sudden stops. Want proof tournaments mattered? William Marshall, considered the greatest knight of the 12th century, captured over 500 horses during his tournament career. 500. That's a fortune walking around on hooves. But all this training, all this practice, all this investment, sometimes it failed spectacularly. And when a war horse broke down mid-battle, the consequences were catastrophic. Even the best-trained destrier could snap. And when a war horse broke during battle, it didn't just stop working. It became a liability that trampled its own side. The most common trigger? Arrow wounds. You could desensitize a horse to noise, fire, blood, chaos, but you couldn't train away genuine pain. An arrow punching through the thigh or chest made years of conditioning vanish instantly. The horse bolted. Didn't matter where. Usually backwards, straight through the infantry that was supposed to be protected. Then there's fire. Horses that hadn't been properly introduced to flames during training, one volley of burning arrows and they threw their riders like rodeo bulls. Knights in 50 pounds of armor don't bounce well. Trust me on that math. But here's what surprised me most. Fear wasn't actually the biggest problem. Exhaustion was. A tired horse simply stopped responding. You could kick, pull, scream commands. Nothing. The animal's brain just checked out. Like a computer running too many programs at once. Some horses developed what we now call PTSD. After particularly brutal battles, they became permanently unpredictable. Find one moment, then something triggered a memory, and they'd rear without warning. These horses were essentially worthless. Nobody wanted a destrier that might panic during Tuesday breakfast because a pot clanged wrong. Smart commanders learned to work around this. Untested horses went in the second wave, not the first. Let them see combat from a safer position before demanding independent action. Makes sense, right? But all this careful training, all these backup plans, all these generations of breeding excellence, none of it prepared medieval cavalry for what was coming next. Technology was about to make war horses obsolete entirely. Here's where centuries of careful breeding and patient training got demolished by technology. The English longbow at Crécy in 1346 changed everything. Archers killed horses from 200 yards away. 200 yards. That's further than most people can throw a baseball. Years of training, thousands of gold coins invested, entire bloodlines carefully cultivated, gone in a single volley before the destrier even reached the enemy. Makes you sick thinking about it. Then, the Swiss showed up with their pikemen. 18-foot poles held by disciplined infantry who didn't break formation. Didn't matter how brave your horse was. Didn't matter how many years you'd spent teaching it to charge. Physics wins. A wall of sharpened sticks pointed at chest height stops any cavalry charge cold. But gunpowder delivered the killing blow. Here's what made it truly unfair. A peasant with a musket, someone who'd trained for maybe a week, could kill a destrier worth an entire village's annual income. No skill required, just point and squeeze. The math stopped making sense. Why spend 3 generations breeding the perfect warhorse when any idiot with a firearm could end that investment in seconds? The last major cavalry charge using medieval-style warhorses happened at Marignano in 1515. After that, horses became transportation, not weapons. Soldiers rode to battle, then dismounted to fight. And those beautiful combat movements, the capriole, the levade, the courbette, they survived. You can still see them today in fancy dressage competitions. Rich people in expensive outfits making horses do tricks that once decided the fate of kingdoms. Combat techniques reduced to artistic performance. Nobody needs them anymore.